There you go.
I want to share it with everybody. Thank you.
So let me know when you can see the reimbursement guide. Can you see it okay? Uh-oh, did we lose Sarah? Well, looks like we lost Sarah. Okay, thank you everyone for telling us so you can see it. Give us 1 second here. Let me get Sarah back on the line. Okay, generally speaking, and I'll just kind of go until Sarah can jump back on. Generally speaking, we have 4 quarters here at the city. Most of you are aware of that. First quarter started July 1st, right after we had approved the contracts. Which usually doesn't give you guys a lot of time, but July 1st to September 30th is the first quarter submission. And it looks like Sarah's jumping back on now, so I'll let her take over in a second. Typically, those will be due 15 days after the end of the quarter. So as you can see, July 1st to September 30th, due by October 15th. And then you have the subsequent dates for each quarter here as well. Okay. The final quarter, which is April 1st to June 30th, we have implemented a shorter deadline, just 10 days instead of 15, just to account for the fact that finance needs to close out all of the billing for that fiscal year by a particular date. And so since everything gets sort of pushed in at the last minute, they've asked us to tighten up that timeline. So it's down to 10 days versus 15. And again, if that deadline isn't met, it could be very challenging in order to reimburse you for that 4th quarter. Sarah, are you back?
I am. Sorry about that.
Welcome back.
I accidentally clicked leave meeting when you started the recording.
No problem. Okay.
Thanks for covering the timeline. So next is just all of the required documents that you will be asked to send in on a quarterly basis. So you will have to fill out an invoice, and everybody should have the invoice template for fiscal year 21-22. You'll have to send in supporting documentation, and that supporting documentation is important for making sure that expenditures charged to the grant are in line with the contract, and that the costs were incurred during the quarter that you're reporting them for. And along with the supporting documentation, you'll send in a quarterly report outlining all of the individuals you served, or the steps that you took towards meeting the goals that you outlined in your contract, and all of the demographic information about those individuals. And I would add that for some organizations this year will be implementing a self-certification for all of the individuals served, depending on your activity. We'll get to that a little bit later, but that may or may not be a required document for your organization. The next section here just describes a little bit about the supporting documentation. I won't go through it in too much detail, but like I said, we just need to make sure that the costs were incurred during the quarter, that those costs were properly accrued, that they were allowable expenditures under the HUD guidelines and according to your application and what you outlined your expenditures for the activity to be, and that the expenditures were approved by City of Milpitas staff. Again, we'll be comparing the expenditures to those things that you outlined in your application and that are listed in the scope of your contract. The last page on this document is just give some examples of reimbursement allowable costs and the backup documentation that would be needed in order to support those costs being reimbursed. So an example would be, paying out salaries for employees that work on the activity that you are receiving funding for. And the backup documentation lists that, you have to provide payroll information and each of the things that, have to be included on that payroll information, and so on for, fringe benefits, equipment, rent or mortgage for, office and utilities, as well as professional services. So I would say, maybe at the end towards the Q&A portion, if you have any specific questions, we can talk about that, but also feel free to reach out to us if you're confused about this. We'll also share some, a guidebook for subgrantees at the end that you can refer to if you have any questions about allowable costs for CDBG activities. And the next thing that we're going to pull up is, I believe, the invoice template.
Getting it right now.
Thank you. Yeah.
And let me know when you can see it.
I can see it, thanks. So here's the CDBG invoice template for fiscal year 21-22. If you received funding last year, it's the exact same invoice template as last year. I just wanted to review some common errors that I typically notice from time to time as they come in. So you'll always want to, typically after you fill out the company name and address and everything on the right-hand side, that'll stay the same throughout each quarter. You'll want to make sure that the date and invoice number are always updated from quarter to quarter. So just make sure, the date that you send it in matches on there, and always make sure on the left-hand side to update the quarter so it's reflected as the accurate quarter for the invoice. A common mistake that I usually see at the bottom, we'll need to make sure you fill in your CDBG awarded grant amount on the left of those three columns. So that'll be the amount that it was awarded for your project. There are a couple of projects who had to be split between different funding sources. So just as an example, let's say you have a project that you received $20,000 for, and $10,000 came from the formula funding bucket, and $10,000 came from the CDBG COVID-19 funds. We were required to make two separate contracts for that. So it'll also be separate reports and invoices and everything like that. So, if you're charging towards one of those contracts, just make sure to put $10,000 there instead of the total $20,000 amount that was awarded. But not to confuse everybody, there's only a couple of people or of organizations who had to be split. So you probably already know who you are. But just make sure the CDBG awarded grant amount from the contract is listed there. The amount you're requesting for the quarter that you're submitting the invoice will go in the middle, and then you'll just have to subtract the difference there for the balance after this quarter's request. Sometimes towards the end of the fiscal year, quarters 3 and 4, our balance doesn't always match up with the balance here. So just double check the math on that as far as, for quarter 4, make sure you're going off of the previous balance and update it for each quarter. And then always make sure that the middle column that says amount requested this quarter matches the column or the row at the bottom that says total amount requested. Those need to always be the same. And then the services rendered will be kind of broken down into the allowable expenditures, those different categories. So an example would be if you're partially doing salary, you would put the amount going towards paying salaries in that first row. The second row could be, expenses like printing costs or costs related to outreach or something like that. So just breaking down the different services rendered there and reflecting the total amount at the bottom. And I believe that's it for the invoice.
I'll pull up the quarterly report now.
Yes, please.
And let me know when you can see it.
I can see it.
How's that arrow working? Is that too much production value for?
I think it's good. This one will be more of like filling in typing, but I think it's helpful. Keeps it exciting. So this is our new quarterly reporting template for fiscal year 21-22. I went ahead and filled in a template for each organization's activity and sent them out this morning. The goals are going to be reflecting what you submitted in your application and what is in your scope of services on your contract for this year. So at the top, you will see your organization's name and a description of the project that you'll be reporting on. I ask that you fill in the rest of the information when you're submitting your quarter one report. I filled in the allocation amount as well as the annual goals that are listed in the contract. I had to type these in manually, so just like I'm already seeing a little typo next to visits. So just kind of review and make sure everything looks accurate. And so when you are going in to fill out the quarterly report, a couple of things that I just want to make sure everybody's clear on. You'll always, in row 9 there, you'll always put the amount that you're requesting this quarter, and it will kind of auto deduct from the total each quarter. So it's really helpful for us to see that up there. That was a new addition to last year's quarterly report, and a lot of the times they come in without that top part filled out. So just remember to put the total amount you're requesting for each quarter there. During quarter one, you'll fill out the top part of your goals. This section is, what your goal of number of people served is as it relates to the specific goal that you're working on. So for example, that top one, if you're hoping to serve 40 residents in a fiscal year, you might break it down 10 each quarter, however you want to break it down, and then just make sure to fill in the goal on the total side at the end. I don't think that one auto-populates. So that would be the top portion, and then each quarter you will be filling in the actual number of people served on this bottom section. So those numbers might vary, and they will auto-populate over at the end. One thing that we are also asking this year that we haven't asked before is, the biggest piece of the quarterly report is that, we have to have a main goal, and that the number being reported towards that main goal has to align with all of the race and ethnicity and income level data that's being reported below. So if you wouldn't mind kind of highlighting the main goal that you will be reporting on, before your quarter one submission. For example, we have Catholic Charities, we have theirs pulled up right now, and we're assuming that probably the one that's the total amount of people served is going to be that main goal that all of the demographic information will match up to. So they reported in this example 8 individuals for quarter one. So we always need the income level data to match the number that's being reported above, and same with the race and ethnicity information below that. So this section, we tried to simplify it a little bit this year. So we always need to know the race and ethnicity of the individuals being served, but we also need to know, if that individual is Hispanic or non-Hispanic. So what you will do is kind of fill in the number of each race that was served, and of those, you will fill in, which of those were Hispanic or non-Hispanic, or actually just Hispanic on this quarterly report. Which of those individuals served identified as Hispanic, and then that one will not continue to populate through the quarters. So let's say this is what it looked like after quarter one. You'll kind of pull it up again to fill out quarter two, and we'll be filling those numbers in, and then you'll just, so if it's 12 for quarter two, you'll just go back in and update how many of those 12 were Hispanic, and make sure to keep tabulating that one yourself each quarter, adding to it. Not sure if that was confusing. Robert might have a better way of explaining that. Feel free to jump in.
No, I think you did a great job there. Again, at the end of the day, all HUD is asking us for is how many people did we serve? What was the main goal? How many people did we serve? How many of them were at what income level? What was the race and ethnicity? And how many of those within that race and ethnicity were Hispanic? We used to have kind of two different sections like this below this one section, and we just thought it would be easier to just minimize the distraction and just have it here for you to tabulate. So at the end of the day, if we're going to have 40 people served, let's just say for this example that we actually serve 40, and then these numbers here all total 40, you're going to look back and tell us how many of the total 40 that you served were Hispanic and by what race they were. And that's copying exactly what HUD asks us to input into their data system. So again, it simplifies things a little bit on our end. If it complicates it on your end, that's certainly not our intention. But we are trying to make these reports a little easier because it's all data in, data out. So we found that the separate sections, the whole sections for Hispanic and then the total were resulting in a lot of errors. So we're trying something new this quarter or this year.
There was a question in the chat, shouldn't the total add or Hispanic and other race/ethnicity?
I think I understand the question. So this is the total amount served, and then it's of these 10, one of them were Hispanic, so it would already be duplicated in. So again, it's not a separate section. It's of white, one Hispanic, of yeah. So this is the way that we're going to keep the spreadsheet. And again, I think after the first quarter, it'll become a little easier to understand based on just filling this out.
Okay, great. And we can come back to it at the end during the Q&A if needed more clarity on that. I think we're going to get into the self-certification requirements. So if you wouldn't mind pulling back up the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, and I just want to quickly, Teresa has a question here. If we have two funding sources, do we fill out two quarterly reports? Yes, that's correct. Each funding source will have its own contract, and each contract needs to have its own quarterly report. Thanks, Teresa.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that. Last year, it worked out pretty well having the organizations who had two funding sources and therefore two contracts to fully expend the smaller amount first, just kind of get that out of the way, and then the rest of the quarters billing from the larger amount.
Okay, and then Sarah, you said the self-certification is
yeah, I have a few slides on the PowerPoint about self-certification.
Okay, let me get that up. Gotta find it first. 1 second.
Teresa asked, could you let us know who has 2 funding sources? You would have gotten 2 quarterly report documents for a single activity if it was being billed from 2 funding sources. And I also believe I noted it in the email that I sent out this morning. During the Q&A, I'll go and pull it up, and I'll just kind of say who has 2 funding sources, but I'll have to pull up a separate document for that. Okay, so other than the invoice and quarterly report, we formulated a new document this year to assist with ensuring that we have met all of the requirements to HUD as far as reporting the demographic information of the individuals served and making sure that they're benefiting low and moderate income individuals. So, I think most, if not all, of the activities that we're funding this year are meeting the national objective of benefiting low and moderate income individuals. And, of those, a majority are, the limited clientele. So, making sure that 51% or more of the individuals served are low and moderate income. So a new requirement that we are going to be implementing is a self-certification form. And this self-certification form is only required if your project does not exclusively serve a presumed eligible population. So HUD considers the following populations presumed to be low and moderate income, and therefore, they don't need to self-certify that they are low and moderate income. So those populations include abused children, battered spouses, elderly persons, severely disabled adults, homeless persons, illiterate adults, persons living with AIDS, and migrant farm workers. So that's just kind of taken from the HUD handbook on presumed eligible. So by implementing the self-certification form, we'll ensure that all of the information that is required is being gathered by our subgrantees, and we're asking that they be submitted with the invoice and quarterly report package, but in a separate file if possible, because we're just going to be kind of filing them away in the case that we get audited, or we have to, match those for our internal, finance invoicing process. So not including them in a giant PDF with all of your other backup documentation, but a separate file for those. So on the next slide, I kind of broke down which activities that we're serving this year that serve presumed eligible populations, and which of those will need to utilize the self-certification form. So on the left, these activities serve individuals that HUD identifies as presumed to be low and moderate income, whether that be seniors or victims of domestic violence. And on the right side, we will need a self-certification from these projects because they don't meet they don't exclusively serve individuals who fall under a presumed eligible category. So we can get into, questions on a case-by-case basis, after the Q&A. What we decided to do, since not everybody falls under this category, we will do the Q&A next, and then we'll come back to the self-certification form and do a walkthrough of that form, just so since it's a new form, there might be a lot of questions about it, and we just wanted to make sure that those who don't have to fill it out didn't have to sit through that before participating in the Q&A. So the next slide, I believe we're just going to kind of open things up, and I listed our contact information. This was intended to just be, a informational overview, but of course, we anticipate that there might be some further questions specific to your activity. So feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to, speak with you on the phone or email about any questions you might have. The link here is the HUD handbook for CDBG subrecipients. So it gets into a little more detail of eligible activities and backup documentation and everything like that. So it's a really good resource, and I can send out this this link. Yeah, we can put it in the chat as well. So with that, if anybody has a question, you can definitely put it in the Q&A, or I think if you raise your hand, we'll be able to unmute you.
Go ahead and put that link in the chat. And there are a few questions here. One from Lauren, just to clarify, if we are serving, say, abused children, we do not have to self-certify, correct? I'll just go ahead and put the self-certification list that Sarah crafted here. If your organization is on the presumed eligible side, the left side, then you do not have to self-certify. If your organization is on the right, then you do have to self-certify. And Lauren, if you can let me know if that answers your question. If not, happy to chat offline about it. Thank you. From Gloria, this is a good question. Counseling services are highly confidential. In this self-certification, can Lighthouse use last name and first name initial only? Yes, this isn't about breaking confidentiality. We want to respect confidentiality. With respect to these self-certifications, it's more that HUD needs some sort of document that just helps align that the ability to fully determine eligibility for their services may be very intensive, and this self-certification helps us streamline your approach to serving customers instead of being bogged down in documentation requests with your individual clients in order to serve them. So any measures you need to take to preserve confidentiality, we encourage that. And Gloria, I hope that answers your question. Susan says, might you be able to copy the link to the HUD handbook into the chat? I believe that has been done. Sarah, let me know if that's what you put a link to. It looks like it is.
It is.
Kishan has a question. It says, this is a question about the invoice format. When we submit the second quarter, do we subtract the first quarter amount and the first column amount granted? Perhaps I'm not reading that correctly, but maybe Sarah, we can reach out to Kishan offline and just talk him through the invoice for second quarter related to the first quarter. So Kishan will go.
Yeah, it might be. So the first column will always remain the amount granted. It will stay the same quarter to quarter. The middle number will always change because it's going to be specific to the quarter you're reimbursing for. And then the last column will always be the amount remaining after the quarter that you are requesting. If that clarifies it, let me know if it does not. And I also wanted to circle back to the question about activities that have split funding sources. So this year, it's only the Next Door Solutions Capital Improvement Project and the Silicon Valley Independent Living Center rent relief contracts.
Okay, well, if you have another question, please feel free to type it into the chat. Kishan, I see you have your hand raised. If you wouldn't mind putting it into the chat or in the Q&A, that would be really helpful for us. So I'll give you a moment to do that. And then Sarah, do you kind of want to just maybe give them some insight as to what's next? If with relation to the self-certification forms?
Sure. So the self-certification forms, I think if you pull up the rent relief self-certification form, it kind of encompasses both, which I can explain once it's pulled up. But the self-certification form is pretty much asking the same information that we are requesting be recorded on the quarterly report. And it's intended to, provide that breakdown and ensure that information is being collected for those activities that aren't serving a presumed eligible population. So pretty much we will be asking which I believe it's which goal towards the con plan that your project falls under. I'll go ahead and, Robert, I'm not sure if you're pulling it up right now.
I'm doing a very poor job of doing that, but I am working on it. Should be coming up.
Yeah. Great. Okay, yeah, this is the this is the form that will be used for everybody except for SVILC. This is kind of our general self-certification form. SVILC is providing rent relief, so theirs has an additional page about the rent relief that they're providing. But this self-certification form is describes, the beneficiary members of the family or household that are being served. Under type of assistance, you'll select the type of project that your project falls under. So that affordable housing, rental rehabilitation, fair housing, and micro enterprise support are very specific to Rebuilding Together, Project Sentinel, and the Filipino American Chamber of Commerce. Those kind of cover those three. Everything else will fall under that community funding or public services. So that's kind of just outlining the type of project that your organization is serving. You will fill in the information about the head of household, again, keeping in mind confidentiality. If you feel that, confidentiality is best kept without including, any one of these fields, then, that's definitely okay, or you can adjust it to just include, no, not the full name or full address. Below that is information about the rest of the household. So the first line will always be repeating the head of household, and you'll check that first box to indicate that it's the head of household that you described above. And then you'll list everybody else in the household using the key below to indicate if it's a child, an individual with disabilities, older adults age 62 or older, and a full-time student age 18 or over, a child under the age of 18, or a minor under the age of 15. And then the last column would be attends school at Milpitas Unified School District. So that is the household information. The next page gets into their income verification. So at the top, you'll see the 2021 HCD income limits that we refer to when determining income levels for each activity. So you'll notice the moderate of 120% for each household size above, and then there's also the low of 80% is outlined there as well. So what you'll do is have the household self-certify what their income is, and you will fill in the gross annual income for all members, all adults in the household, and you'll indicate which income category they fall under. So, if it was 50,000 for a family of 2, then, you know, they would fall under very low, since it's less than that number there. So the next would be the race and ethnicity of the household. So you'll want to answer both of these questions. Unfortunately, couldn't get a checkbox to work, but if you just bold or put an X or highlight if they are Hispanic or non-Hispanic, and then their race below that, that would be great. And then we'll have the head of household sign as far as the other adults in the household, other beneficiary adults. So that would be the end for most projects. And then our rent relief program has a separate page, but they are already aware of that and using the form. So we can touch base with them later if they have any questions about that. But this is the self-certification form. And then basically when you're going through and filling out the quarterly report, it would be a culmination of each of these self-certification forms, represented in total number of unduplicated individuals served. So I will open it up now for questions that are specific to the self-certification form.
So it doesn't look like any questions are coming in. And again, this only applies to those listed on the PowerPoint, towards the end of the PowerPoint that need self-certification. So if this applies to you, then, and you still have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to set up a one-on-one with you and just walk you through it. Can we use a Google form? So questions are coming in here. Can we use a Google form to obtain the certification? As long as the document gets returned to us in the manner that we need it, I'm delighted that you would like to streamline it. It's certainly something that we're looking into on our end as well to help you streamline the collection process. So again, as long as the self-certification form comes back to us in the way that we need it to, please feel free to be as creative as you need to be in order to streamline your operations on your end. Hope that answers your question. Gloria, do we have to complete a form for each family or individual receiving counseling service? So yeah, it would be one form per family receiving your services. So yeah, it applies to a household. So if individuals inside of a family are receiving counseling services, one document for the household, as long as all of the individuals are listed on the document in some capacity, then one self-certification form should be okay. All right. Any other questions? Does not appear so. So with that, I will say we are going to end this webinar. Thank you very much for your attendance, for your continued work with us, and for your continued work in the community. We really do appreciate all the work that you do, and we look forward to another fun year of CDBG with you all. And just finally, thank you very much to Sarah for being the champion of all of this, and the person that puts this together and coordinates with all of you and ensures that everything runs smoothly. I assure you, on the back end, it's never as smooth as she makes it seem on the front end, but a true testament to how great she is at running this. And so thank you, Sarah, and thank all of you for joining us today.
Thanks, Robert. It's definitely a team effort, and I appreciate everything you do, and I'm looking forward to working with all of you this year on CDBG. So let us know if you have any further questions that come up as you look through all of the required documentation and everything for this year.
thanks everyone. We'll hang out here for a couple more minutes in case you still have questions. If not, have a nice rest of your day. And Sarah, couple of things. I'll call you after we're done. Let's see. We have pretty good attendance. I think 24 people was the most I saw on the attendee side for the most part.
Yeah. Great. So you might want to stop recording.